Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Innovation Showcase. The main purpose of this ongoing series is to inform viewers about exciting innovations and creative individuals across the fields of business, science, technology, education, and the arts. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Hayward Zwerling from Somerville. Hayward is a retired endocrinologist and an amateur woodworker. He's here today to share some of his woodworking pursuits, most notably the story and process of creating two giant wooden sculptures of an elephant and a pair of giraffes, which are now on display on the Somerville Community Path. During the program, we're learning why and how these engaging figures, Elly the elephant and George the giraffe and Big Poppy, came about, and how they ended up on the Somerville Community Path. Let's start by meeting Hayward and then hearing all about his woodworking endeavors. Welcome, Hayward. So delighted you're able to be here.
Nice to be with you, Jay. I'm glad I could help.
As is the case with many, many others, I was quite taken with the story that appeared about you and your giant wooden sculptures in the Globe a couple of weeks ago. Eager to hear more and have you inform viewers, give a little behind the scenes aspect to that. But before we jump right to that work, think it would be of interest if you'd briefly share maybe just a little bit more about your background, professional interest, artistic interest, please.
Sure. So I was a endocrinologist, originally planning on being an academic endocrinologist doing protein structure function relationships, and ultimately went into private practice. Just about the time I got my first job in a real salary in private practice, there was a TV show on called The New Yankee Workshop on PBS. And I guess it was the second show on PBS, which was dedicated to teaching people how to do things. And this was about woodworking. I just happened to tune into the first episode and I said I needed a hobby. I'm going to buy a table saw. And that's how it all got started.
Wow. And what is it or has led to your interest in this field? What is it about this medium that appeals to you so much?
Um, it's a little bit forgiving, say, as opposed to, say, water paints, which you mess up and it's gone. Um, and it's hands-on. So it's sort of like creating something in real time and you can watch it appear in front of your eyes. Um, when you practice medicine, you tinker around with somebody's blood pressure medicines. They come back 2 weeks later and is the blood pressure better? If it's not, are they taking the medicines? Are they not taking it? And so forth. And sometimes you're not really sure. When I cut a piece of wood into a perfect square and I measure it on the diagonals, I know I got it. And that sense of instant gratification is really nice.
Nice, nice. Time permitting, we hope to see some of your work. But can you just give us an overview, not just a range of the type of things you have been
Sure.
building over the years?
Yeah. Most of the stuff I do, there's usually a purpose for it. So I need, like, for example, I needed a dresser in my house, or I needed a desk in my office. Usually there's a precipitant for it. But sometimes things are just on a whim, and I have an idea and I want to see what it actually looks like. The giraffes and the elephant, which we're going to talk about, that actually started after a visit to the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. And when I was there, after I saw these Picasso sculptures, there was an exhibit of like 160 sculptures. Apparently, Picasso didn't sell any of these, or very, very few. And when I walked out, I said to my wife, "Oh, Picasso, he just hones things down to the essence, and that's what's all that's left." And I said, I can do that. And then when I got home, I found some scrap wood in my shop, and I made an 8-foot giraffe out of scrap wood that looks like those guys that you're looking at right now, but it wasn't painted and it was scrap wood and it was just 8 feet tall. And I put it in the living room. And he stayed in the living room for a while until my wife said, okay, enough, get him out. And I moved him to the backyard. And then I decided to make his parent, his father, Big Poppy. and made that one out of scrap wood. And the two of them sat in my backyard for a while until Gail said, okay, enough. And I moved into the Somerville Community Path. And that's how those got started.
That's fabulous, fabulous. I mean, I think what you just described comes across through a lot of inventors we've met in this series or read about, is just having the fun, the playfulness to the whole inventive spirit seems to permeate your approach to your work here.
Yeah, you try things, and I think this is probably true of everybody who considers themselves an artist or a maker or a scientist. In almost everything, it's trial and error, and you try to hone in on getting to that vision that you think you want to get to, or the vision sort of evolves in real time as you're working. And many of these things that I started with, the ultimate product wasn't exactly what I started working towards, but you can see the resemblance from the first product, the very first vision, that's done on paper or on the computer, and the final one. So in the giraffes, I made those first two ones, put them on the community path, set them up in the dead of night because I had no idea. I knew it wasn't legal just to put these things out there, but there were already some sculptures out there. And this is Somerville, and Somerville's pretty tolerant for stuff like this. So I put these two out, and then I started working on and made Elly the elephant, which is what we're looking at right now. And I built her in my basement. Now, needless to say, I can't assemble her in the basement, so I designed it so that she was in pieces, and I put them together in manageable size pieces, and then I could take them out in the backyard and set them up. And she too lived in the backyard for a while until Gail said, okay, enough. And then what I did is got two friends at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I loaded them up into the pieces in the van, set it up online on site, and walked away, and people started playing with them.
Fabulous,
And
fabulous. Before we enjoy a video clip that you've put together that documents this process, just what was the inspiration or motivation for the elephant?
um, I don't really know if I can say that there was a single motivation. I was still taken with the Picasso of narrowing these things down to the essence. And I've always been enamored with the big animals on the plains or pretty much anywhere. I actually did a drawing of a full-scale blue whale and made a template out of string so I can lay it down and then trace over the string just to get the full size of these things so people can appreciate it. It's not art, but it is interesting to see how big these animals really were. And these big animals always just draw me in.
Before we enjoy the clip that you've narrated, just a little introduction to the documentation that you've assembled and that we're about to enjoy.
So a lot of it happens as I'm making it. I take photographs along the way, sometimes so I can go back and look at what I did. It turns out sometimes there are technical things that you do that you forget, tricks that you come up with to make something happen, to make a joint a certain way. And if I have the photographs, I can go back and try to figure out what I forgot that I did a couple of years earlier. So that's part of it. And part of it is I never know what's going to happen. And since digital photography is basically free, I can take these pictures and thin them out. And sometimes they turn out to be useful, like in these these movies that you're going to see.
Okay, well, let's enjoy the clip and then continue our conversation.
What is an elephant? I studied pictures over and over again, made some schematics, and ultimately made a decision and built the first prototype, and yet another, and another, and another. I compare my prototypes to the original, make further revisions, and revise again until I think I've got the basics, and then I move on to the next phase. Okay, so the plan was to try to make the elephant more interactive. So this is still a demo and a prototype, obviously. So the way I set it up is you can see the head and the ears are kind of laid back. And the idea is that when it's full scale, people will pull up on the trunk, the head lifts up and the ears come forward. And hopefully you guys can see that. After I've got a handle on the head, I move into the third dimension and start prototyping in that realm until ultimately I arrive at something that I'm comfortable with. And then it is time for me to move on to full-scale mock-up. After I move to full-scale modeling, it becomes clear to me that this is a rather large project. In fact, it's very large. And at this point, it was not clear that I should go forward. My family encouraged me to move forward with the project, and I filled out the 3 dimensions and began to understand the true scale of the project. I continued building out the project, and I went through 3 iterations of elephant ears until I was satisfied and ended up with this configuration. And now it was done and ready for installation. I had determined where I was going to put the elephant, and knowing it was on public property, this would need to be done surreptitiously, or at least when nobody was watching. I recruited some friends to help, and we began assembling the components for installation. Loaded the truck up, drove to the destination, and started to unload at the installation site. It took us 2 hours to assemble it on site, but we didn't run into any major problems. And when it was done, people immediately began to interact with it, which was most gratifying. When we left, I was happy nobody got hurt, nobody got arrested, and it all worked out delightfully well.
This is such wonderful documentation, not only of the assembly, but your thinking and the process that you, as the creator, the inventor, went through with the different prototypes.
Right. So, so after I put this one up and I saw the, so this is just me doing the first time I've actually got it working in my backyard. After I set it up and saw how much people like the interactivity of it, about this time, the original giraffes was starting to decay. It wasn't built for outdoors. It was built, as I said, with scrap wood. It wasn't even painted with outdoor paint. And the neck of the big giraffe, the 16-foot giraffe, started to warp. So I then decided, okay, I'm going to take that down and rebuild it properly at a pressure-treated lumber. And decided, okay, the elephant was such a big hit because of the interactivity. I got to figure out a way to make the giraffe interactive. And that's why I came up with the ears. There was a need to make it better. And I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure. And somehow that idea popped into my head.
That's terrific. And was the process similar with the giraffes that you went through and documented with the
Yeah, I got all the same photos. And there's I didn't make a movie of the giraffes, but I could have if I wanted to. Yeah, it could have, but I didn't. And I've got, you want more photos? I can from the very beginning. I think you probably have enough already.
Terrific, terrific. What's been, since the installation, the reaction and feedback from visitors in the community?
So it really surprised me how positive it was. For both of these sculptures, they needed some repairs in the beginning. Bolts got loose and they had to be tightened. Cables had to be replaced until I got everything just right. And inevitably, when I'm on site working on it, people will come up and first say, are you the person who made this? Actually, they say, are you the artist? Which I then have a conversation about artist and maker, but that aside. Um, and And then they're worried, am I taking it down or destroying it? And it's like, no, I'm fixing it. And then there's always a thank you. I love this sculpture. My kids play with it. You know, when my
Mhm.
friends and I walk by, we play. So it really is very delightful. And people thank me all the time for it when I'm there. And sometimes I'll just go to watch people play with it from a distance. And
Nice.
that's kind of gratifying.
Any feedback from Somerville
No.
officials?
No, I've heard nothing from Somerville nor the state. Apparently, the land to either side of the path, I guess, is owned by the state. Someone told me that land is leased by the city. But Somerville's a pretty tolerant town for this type of thing. So I'm not expecting any problems. Time will tell now that I've got all this PR, but initially I kept myself anonymous because I didn't know what was going to happen. Ultimately, I concluded there'd be a hue and cry from the mothers of the kids who come and visit the sculpture if I took it down. My wife had a great experience. She was walking up to the sculpture, and there were like a dozen children, ages 4 or 5, running around, and 2 adults supervising them. She introduced herself and said, I'm the spouse of Hayward. She said, kids, come over. This is the spouse. The kids all cheered. And then the kids run back and play. And Gail says, if they pull that wire that comes down the giraffe's spine, they can make the ears wiggle. And the teacher said, yes, they know. They're only allowed to pull it 5 times so everybody gets a turn.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Again, that just adds to the playfulness of this whole endeavor. Just
Right.
wonderful, just wonderful. Well, like to hear more about maybe some upcoming projects, but before that, we have some wonderful images of other work
What
that
is an
you've
elephant?
done,
What is,
and we're going to go through them, and feel free to add whatever comments you'd like.
So my wife had done a series of self-portraits during COVID. She does portrait painting in oil. And so this is one of hers. She calls it Ode to Sergeant. And basically said, if you want to build a frame for me, go for it. Now, for the longest time, I would build whatever frame I want. And I would ask her, do you have a painting that would fit for this? We didn't really work together because I only wanted to build the frame I want, and she only wanted the frame that she wanted on it. But ultimately, we came to an agreement that this style frame, and that's how this one came up. And there were several other paintings that she did in this, not in this particular style, but have the same type of frame that were done during the COVID lockdown.
Sounds like wonderful commentary on what makes a good marriage as well.
Right. So we started out working independently, and then we started evolving to where this is one of them where, okay, here's the painting, now you do the frame. And we're actually have our next step is I've already have a design for a frame, and after I build the frame, she's got to make the painting.
That's great. That's great.
And you can see behind me some of the others that I've made and she's painted.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. Well, let's continue with these samples and
Yeah,
some
so
work.
this was just another frame that I made, what I call a self-portrait. My wife does these paintings of our kids, her dog. She's never done one of me, so I decided to do one of me with a frame.
That's great.
And this is just a detail of the technique used in the first frame that you saw.
How has your craftsmanship developed since that early introduction that you mentioned to where you are now?
So I don't really consider myself a good quality woodworker. I'm not really interested in how do you make a perfect joint. I understand that that's what a lot of the woodworkers they pride themselves on. For me, it's the creative process of coming up with the design and making the first prototype. And I consider all my stuff prototypes. Somebody else can make it properly for the second version. But for me, it's making that very, very first one by hook or crook. And I'm looking for the easiest, fastest way to get it done, which I know is an anathema to some, but that's what drives me. It's the creation itself that's the fun part. And this has to be fun. It's a hobby. I call
Terrific.
this my corner frame. Again, Gail painted this during COVID of some plants in our backyard when it was locked down. And it was just a riffing on the idea, on the concept of what is a frame.
Nice.
And
Nice.
there's sort of a constant tension between her paintings and my frames because the frames sometimes detract from the painting.
Hmm.
And I would argue that the paintings detract from the frame, but
Ah,
I understand I'm in the minority opinion here.
that's funny.
Right. This was another project that I made. I called it my boomerang table. And again, it was the sort of thing that we needed a table in front of our sofa, which has an angle in it. And I got this spectacular piece of wood and made it look like that. And on it, you can see some coasters that I made also, wood coasters.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Fabulous.
Oh, this is one of my earlier projects, the chest of drawers. This project the goal was to create a randomly appearing set of drawers. And it turns out it's not really random. It's actually symmetric around the center.
Hmm.
And although the sizes don't match up if you rotate it around, they're pretty close. And I just couldn't come up with a design that was completely random and yet didn't include drawers that were too small or too large. They all had to be functional within the space. So this is the best I can do in terms of getting close to randomness.
It's fabulous.
And this was the same technique I used for the coasters, for a table, extension on the table. It's supposed to be a cutting board, but my wife refuses to use it as a cutting board, so just uses it as an extension for the table.
Nice. Nice.
We needed something underneath the TV set to hold the stereo components, and that's what this is. It's steam bent oak, the cherry on the bottom, and there's a piece of leather in the back with the LED lights to change color between the two pieces.
No, just hearing you talk about these creations and the notion that you said first motivated you is having sort of a problem like all good inventors do at the beginning and how to solve it, having a need and how
Right,
to
right,
satisfy it. And
right.
that's exactly.
I wrote an article recently that's on my blog, artists versus makers, and I have no idea if anybody would agree with it, but the way I look at it, it is artists basically come up with ideas de novo. Makers, there's some sort of precipitant that causes them to say, okay, I need to solve this problem. And that, for me, that seems to be a crucial difference.
Mm, mm,
This was my
gorgeous.
office desk that I made a long, long time ago, one of my earlier projects.
It's wonderful. Another.
This is a frame that I made for a friend's painting. This one's not by my wife. And it was just sort of a riff on the idea of a frame because it doesn't really frame it. It just sits behind it, but it works great.
No, I really appreciate the divergent view you're taking to frames in this case and just expanding the idea or
Right,
riffing, as you mentioned, and
right.
another great example.
Right. So this was an example of where I got my wood. The guy said to me, look, I've got these two bent curved pieces of walnut branch. Nobody will ever use them. You'll come up with something. Here, take them. In fact, I had actually reached out to some museums and said, look, you should really do an exhibit on frames because people don't, if you go into the MFA and look at some of the frames, some of them are spectacular and nobody sees them.
Hmm.
And so I think that the frames are past due for their own show.
That's a terrific idea. I know that struck me actually in the recent Sargent show at the
Mhm.
MFA. I was quite taken with the work, of course, but the frames
Yeah,
caught my attention. So having a show on frames would be incredibly well received.
right. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, and yeah, I call this my star frame. That's my wife's painting of our daughter who had just come back from some vacation in the sunny climate somewhere.
Nice, nice.
This was my rock table. I do like to mix materials a lot. I mean, you saw in the first frame there was brass mixed with wood. This is a granite mixed with walnut. It was a beautiful piece of walnut. I found a quarry or a masonry up in southern New Hampshire. I made an exact mock-up of what I wanted out of wood. I gave it to them. I said, can you make this out of granite? And they said yes, and it worked.
Most definitely.
Again, this was another piece of wood that was given to me by where I got my wood. The guy said, no one's going to ever use this. It's warped. You'll come up with something. So I wanted to riff on it, and I call it my vanity chair. It turns out it's not real practical. Twice my wife stood up, knocked the chair behind her and broke it, and I fixed it twice, and now it's just sort of sitting in the basement. But it's just such a gorgeous piece of wood. I couldn't let it not be used.
Do you go back to your supplier and either show or tell what you created
Yeah,
from?
I almost always show him what I created. And so yes, I have, thinking that, he would be curious because he's a
Yeah.
woodworker as well. But he's technically excellent, whereas I'm not technically excellent. This I call my compression frame. And there's an interesting story behind this one. Somebody wanted to buy this. We had a Somerville Open Studios show, and my wife was ready to sell the painting, but I was not ready to sell the frame. And the guy said, well, just make a second one and give me the original, or give me the next one. And I said, I don't want to. It's no fun to make it the second time. And he said, well, I'll pay you. And I said, it's not about the money. It just has to be fun. And that's not a fun project. So I don't sell any of the stuff. I just do it because it's fun.
Nice, nice.
And this is the one on the left, the small rocking chair I made for my son 32 years ago when he was 2 years old. And then my daughter and my son are now in the process of, or about to have kids. And I thought, since I'm going to give the small one to my son so he can use for his child, if and when my daughter has a kid, I decided to make a rocking chair. And interesting about the rocking chair on the right, which is designed for a 5-year-old, is originally this was going to be a full-scale rocking chair for an adult. And the problem is we had nowhere to put it in our house. So that's one problem. And the second, I realized it would be a huge piece of wood I'd be working with, and wasn't ready to try to manipulate that, not knowing where I was going to go. So I said, okay, I'll make a smaller version for my daughter as a child rocking chair, and then decide if I want to make the full one.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, in the minute or so left, want to have you have a chance to talk about another endeavor of yours. You mentioned on your site blogs about a number of different topics, and one that I also enjoyed, in addition to your woodworking, is this guide you researched and put together on, as it says right there, designing your retirement. Few words in a minute or so about this.
When I retired about 1.5 years ago, I decided, what do I need to do to have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement? And as any sort of science-trained academician, physician, I went into the medical literature and started looking for articles basically saying, if you do this, this will make you more happy. If you do this, it makes you healthy. If you do this, you'll feel more fulfilled. And ultimately put together a syllabus that's based on about 60 or 65 articles, which is available free online at the URL on the bottom left. And I've been giving lectures on this. I've given 2 lectures so far, and I've got 3 more coming up in the Boston area. And people seem to find it really interesting. And in terms of being innovative, I think it's all part of the same thing. It's just being curious and following your curious instincts and keep asking questions. How do I make this better? How do I make it more interesting? How do I get to the point where I want to end up? And maintaining an openness to the creative process. I guess it's sort of like trying to be a kid again, and not let your adult influences destroy your creative spirit.
Well, that's fabulous, and great advice and role modeling for all of us. So unfortunately, Hayward, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you so much sharing the wooden sculptures, your other woodworking, and how you've branched off as an example with the wonderful retirement syllabus for us to enjoy and learn from. Continued success with future endeavors, and we'll have your contact available in the credits.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's been fun.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us, and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.